Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 280. Give them tools and let them build. The first installment. This is going to be another series, you guys. So we've had a lot of popular series on this show. There's the music literacy series. There's the first days of school series, which blew things up in 2025. I'm hoping that this one is as useful as that, and it is still being created. Recently, I went to Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and presented this framework and this presentation for the first time. This is a new one, and I'm going to turn it into a series of episodes. And possibly down the road, once I've created all of that, I've even been dreaming about turning it into something that can be downloaded as a teacher curriculum guide. This presentation is all about the idea that we as choir teachers, vocal music teachers, band teachers, anybody, should not be the hardest working person in our classrooms. The kids are there to work. The problem is, with a lot of music novices, they don't know how to learn the music without a teacher holding their hand, spoon-feeding, and guiding them along the way. So how do we update the operating system of our classroom so that the students have proficiency in tool use rather than in the songs that we are giving them? What if the centering philosophy of our classrooms was not the repertoire, but the tools that are used to build the repertoire? This could open up an entirely new world of music making possibilities for the kids, but also can shift the burden of responsibility from you, constantly stressing out about how well you have to perform the music so that they can learn it, to them. That's what this presentation is all about. So let me tell you first about what you're going to hear. You're going to hear the first portion of this presentation, and I've cut out some of the non-essential portions, some of the personal anecdotes and other things that I might do in an in-person presentation. And then I've saved the second part of the presentation for next week. So this is going to be a part one this week, and it's going to be a part two next week. And then over the course of the rest of the year of 2026, I'm going to be zooming in and clicking and going deeper on each of the individual tools listed in this presentation to do entire episodes on each tool individually. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. Haven't already, I really think it's time for you to ditch the bulky sight reading books, the paper, all of the things that are already in the kids' folders in your classroom because it's not customizable to what they need in the moment. Sight Reading Factory allows this and so much more, including auto-assessment for at-home assignments, no more grading them individually. They can be graded in the moment. So use the Choralosophy checkout code, Choralosophy. When you check out, it'll give you a 10% discount every time you get a membership for yourself and for all of your students, which is really, really important so they can do this at home. A big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons. So what are the tools? The tools are solfége for pitch, takadimi for rhythm, count singing for duration, functional instrument knowledge. So for singers, that's the knowledge of the voice. For a saxophone player, it would be the functional knowledge of the saxophone, but all of these things are critical regardless of what you teach. The next tool is self-diagnosis, followed by normalizing sound experimentation, and mistake making is a critical tool. Rehearsal efficiency, maximizing time within rehearsal so that they get the feedback that they need, but they also get a lot of repetitions to wire their brains for music. And then the final tool is keep data, talking about and learning how to measure your own success as an educator. I think a lot of times kids think, and teachers sometimes think, that tests and assessments are to measure how good the student is at the thing. I don't think that's the right way to look at tests and assessment at all. I think that's how we as teachers know if we are doing a good job. So all of this and more is coming up on this series. I think that you're going to find it useful. I'm really excited about this series. It's kind of lit a fire under me, and my goal is to have it all out there and usable over the course of 2026 in the early part, so that when this next school year starts, you are going to be really well armed to update the operating system of your classroom. And as always, paid Substack members and Patreon paid subscribers will get the access to this entire uncut presentation. They will also get access to the slides presentation that I am using in the background. That is something that is one of the added benefits of being a Patreon or a Substack paid subscriber. So if you are a member over there, you're going to have access to this whole thing uncut and can jump into it right away without having to wait for next week for part 2. If I walk to like right here and use my teacher voice, is this okay? There is a mic over there. It feels weird to me to be attached to it. If it's okay, I'll just kind of wander a bit back and forth to where my stuff is over here. So thank you, Justin, for having me. Also, by the way, my style of presentation, I really like it to be interactive. So if you're willing to move closer to make it not awkward, that would be great. But feel free to stay, and I'll just come to you and make it awkward. Also, it's been years since I've bitten someone in a presentation. I don't even feel tempted anymore. So feel free to come on down. So Justin, of course, introduced me as a host of a podcast, but I actually also teach choir. So not a lot of people know that, but that is my regular day job. And so we're going to be talking about some things today that I have discovered over the course of my teaching life the hard way. So I'm going to start by having you guys talk to me a bit. What are some of the most stressful things about our job? Who's got some? What are some of the most stressful things about your job? What do you got?
Not enough time.
Not enough time. What else? Go. Trying to motivate the students. Okay, good. What else? Yes. Retention in the programs. Okay, good. What about, and let's take away from this discussion, let's take away all the non-music classroom stresses, because there are those too. They're dealing with administrators, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm talking about today is the in the classroom stress. It is hard for me to get my kids to know how to do X. It is hard for me to feel like my students can master Y concept, whatever it is. Who's got some of those? What are some of your pain points pedagogically? Things that you are beating your head against the wall to be able to get your kids to be really good at? Go. Blending. Okay, good. What else? Music literacy. Feeling like they are proficient. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Like the changing voice in a class that is not separated by voice type. I used to have a tenor and bass section in ninth grade, and then a soprano alto. And then 2 years ago, so it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that one, the boys changing voice thing, is a topic that I present on a lot too, and have a lot of episodes about on the Choralosophy podcast. I encourage people to check them out. Some really awesome experts on there that have researched it, but also I talk about that a lot because it's a personal passion for myself, mostly because I think of it as a dad. So yes, these are all things that are painful for us when we teach. We feel pressure. We feel things like my choir will only perform as well as I do. I have to demonstrate. I have to play their parts. I have to sing it for them. I have to be also fully on. I have to perform for them. Okay? Because we feel like our job is a performance job. That's one. Time. That's come up already. There is never enough. I haven't had a chance to get to blank yet, so they haven't learned it. We haven't gotten to the B section yet. Those types of things. We're always feeling like we're pressured with time. We feel the pressure of dependence. How are you guys with getting music-specific subs? How do your rehearsals go when you're gone? Yep, these are problems that we all face. Classroom management. I am over on the side of the room where the sopranos are working, and the tenors and basses are grabbing each other, right? I'm so focused on helping the girls at that moment, and then the boys are over here doing who knows what, and it's probably not good. And somebody mentioned lack of retention. I taught them how to do this rhythm already, but now I have to do it again, and they're bored. Okay, so here's the thrust of this presentation today. I'm going to sell you a vision. So that's me at my most stressed out. It is not my job to teach you a song. I teach you how to learn songs. And that's not the same thing. We're going to picture sipping coffee, sitting on a stool, casually walking around your classroom. Your students are doing all the work, and you are the least hardworking person in the room. It's a culture thing, and suddenly the music just starts to happen. So, first of all, whenever I make this presentation, I offend people. But I need you to understand that I don't come from a place of moral judgment when I talk about ways we could teach better. I did all of the things that I'm about to say are not right. So that's why I feel like I know that they're right, that they're not right. I did them for 10 years. And I remember how stressed out I was. I remember what it felt like to be the hardest working person in a choir room. I remember what it felt like to be stuck to a keyboard while I played all of the notes for the kids on the piano and felt like if I don't play this better, they won't sing it better. If I don't sing this better, they won't sing it better. That's an incredible amount of pressure. That is an incredible amount of pressure. And I do believe that that's a big part of what causes a lot of us to burn out. Because we feel like that if we aren't the source of the music, then it won't happen. So I call this, offensively, the high priest model. I don't want the kids to have to go through me to access the music. I want to be a coach. I want to be a guide. I want to be an encourager. I want to be somebody who gives them tools and then lets them build the music. So we're going to talk about that today and some of the ways that we can do that in all situations. So this is not one of the things that we're going to try to do today is have a way to think about and reevaluate the operating system running underneath the cell phone that is our class. What I'm not going to do today is give you any kind of like magic warm-up that will solve your music literacy problem. I'm not going to give you like a magic warm-up that solves the changing voice. There isn't a click this for 7 easy steps to have a better choir. These are things that take years. And then we're going to talk a lot about in what scenarios do we feel like we are working harder than the students. One of my favorite ways to illustrate this was my master's degree conducting recital. I was 25 years old, and my whole family came to it. Most of my family are musicians, not professional musicians. They're just, people who sang in choir, and my mom was a music teacher, and my grandma was a piano professor, and so there's a lot of music in my family. So a lot of educated audience members came to my conducting recital, and I was so proud of it. I thought that they were just such a great choir, and I did so many amazing things that they should notice. Okay, I did so many incredibly artistic gestures in that performance, and of course, whenever we perform, because we were all raised as performers. And so we sometimes think of our job still as the conductor, as the leader, as the facilitator, as part of the performance. And so, of course, when I was 25, I'm thinking of this, and my family members come, and they thought it was a great concert, and everybody's, saying good job. And my little brother also sang, also played in band, and came up afterwards. And he's like, yeah, that's all right. That's all right. You look like you're working a lot harder than them. Because, of course, all of these things are happening, and the singers are boop. Right? So there's a disconnect, and then it caused me to kind of rethink that at an early stage in my career of what does it mean to be the facilitator, the leader. So we're going to learn to transfer some of the responsibility for music making and learning from the teacher to the students. This does have to happen gradually. Who's heard of the student-centered learning concept initiative? Okay, it's great, unless you do it wrong. How would it go right now if you were to pass out a piece of choral music to your class? Let's call them your beginners. You pass it out, and then you go do what I was doing in that picture and just sit and drink your water. Would it go well? No, probably not. Not if they're beginners. So student-centered learning is great as long as they already have tools. But until that point, they have to be explicitly taught how to do the tools, which takes repetition and teacher-centered instruction of here's how you do it. Oh, no, let's try it this way. And here's how you do it again. And there's this back and forth. And then gradually, we're able to pass that baton on to our kids. There we go. All right, so some of the traps we fall into, I call it the mimicry trap. We confuse teacher clarity with student understanding. So this goes back to that pressure thing. So I showed the gesture really clearly. That's something I did. That is not the same thing as they know where beat 3 is. Those are two different things. So are they singing it correctly because of something I did, or are they singing it correctly because of something they intuitively understand? And they could have done it whether I passed out and fainted in the middle of the concert or not. And that, of course, is a joke, but I tell them that all the time. What are you going to do if I pass out and faint? We'll help you, Mr. No, the show must go on. You will finish. and you will finish without me. One of my favorite things to do, and I'm sure at first it probably seemed odd to the audiences in my community, but there have frequently been instances, typically with a cappella, highly rhythmic, intricately rhythmic, let me put it that way, pieces of music, where I've just decided that I'm in the way. Because a lot of times with those types of pieces, our gesture causes them to be late. As good as it possibly could be, they are still responding. And so one of the things that I love to do, and it's just tends to be like an in-the-moment decision, is I've been known to just walk off the stage in the middle of a concert with no warning. They've never seen me do that before. I'm just not feeling it, and they just keep singing because we train them to not need me. So other aspects of this, if a student can't function without us, this is my hot take, there will be many. If students can't function without us, then we didn't teach them. We performed for them, and they mimicked. What happens when they have no mimic? They have no one to mimic, aka you're not there, or there's a sub. Success often stems from how well the teacher demonstrates gestures, playing on the piano, singing, etc., rather than how the student decodes, internalizes, and solves their own problems. The way I would explain this is that in our choir classrooms, when they're functioning extremely efficiently and in a student-centered way, and students are able to use all these tools, then rote instruction is functioning the same way it does in early childhood with language. If they've never heard you talk, they can't talk. This is the sound before sight concept I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. But it is very easy to misuse rote instruction. So we're going to talk about some of those ways. Rote teaching, when used as a substitute for reading, produces short-term polish and long-term dependency on you singing. You can get them to sing really well, very quickly, with rote instruction, and there's a place for that. But it can also be misused. Use rote demonstrations. This is kind of a way I think of it, just a quick and easy way to frame it, of like, am I using this in a way that's going to build long-term independence? So I'm thinking, in my classroom, I use rote instruction to help them understand how to sing it, but not what to sing, right? So because if I sing it for them first, and then have them mimic it back, at a neurological level, they are never going to get a chance to read that piece of music ever. Because they will actually be accessing the memory part of their brain, which on an MRI lights up a different part of the brain as when you are reading something. So they have to be able to have that opportunity to decode, to become fluent with the pitch, the rhythm, the text, etc. And once they're through that mental hurdle, then the rote instruction becomes how to sing that better, how to sound better, how to have better resonance, how to choose a better vowel, how to solve a blend problem, all those types of things. That's where the rote instruction comes in, because they've had a chance to decode first at whatever speed they need. And then, of course, there are culturally relevant scenarios where rote teaching is important. So, for example, this is just, I don't know if I would say that this is an absolute per se, but if we're teaching a gospel song, for example, and we can give our kids a chance to learn that in a culturally correct way, teach it by rote. Absolutely teach it by rote. But then again, that's not a substitute for reading, because that's an art form that is oftentimes not read. So you're not substituting for reading. I think our kids need to have those varied ways to understand and read music and learn music. We had talked about that one already. Okay, so then when patterns of pitch and rhythm have been internalized, this is the great part about it. Once those patterns of pitches and rhythms have been internalized in the student's brain, you singing for them is no longer a mimic. It's a conversation. You are having a musical conversation with them about text stress, about phrase, about the dynamics. I'm going to sing it in a certain way, but it's music that they already know in their brain. When I sing it, they already know how it's supposed to go, and now they're listening to a bunch of other details. Like, did you hear when I crescendoed and I decrescendoed? Describe that. Oh, like when you got to the fa, you really had a crescendo, right? They start to have a conversation with you about what they're hearing. So this is all based on a philosophy. In this photograph, also staged, this is my 10th grade girls working on one of their parts, and the image here is me trying to help and them not wanting my help. And this does sometimes happen because I still have old habits from my first 10 years of teaching. So the tactics of all these things that I'm talking about today may vary. Everybody's situations are different. Everybody's got kids for different amounts of time, for different amounts of years, with different amounts of prior experience, etc. I will say in my situation, I have beginning 9th grade tenor bass and beginning 9th grade treble. And in my school district, kids come to us without the opportunity to sing every day until ninth grade. And at maximum, even the kid who wants to sing a lot in middle school is allowed to take 1.25 years of choir spread out over 3 years. That is max in my district. If they want to sing more, they would have to go outside of school to a community choir or something, okay? So I call them beginners. They've sung before, but learning tools, they're getting these things for the first time. And ultimately, I want my students to not need me by the time they are done. So we're going to talk about some definitions. So this presentation is give them tools. So we're going to talk about how, in my concept of what a tool is and what a tool isn't.
Ensemble trips can be more than just a performance. They can build community, inspire artistry, and give students a reason to stay invested. That's why I recommend Kaleidoscope Adventures. For more than 30 years, Kaleidoscope has helped student groups travel with purpose, combining performance opportunities with experiences that deepen musical understanding and create lifelong memories. They'll help you find the right destination, the right venue, and the right balance of music, education, and fun. And they manage the planning from start to finish so you can focus on your job as an educator. To explore options for your choir, visit mykatrip.com or find the link in the show notes.
So I distinguish between giving them tools and giving them answers. A tool for students are transferable. The tool is transferable, meaning they use it in one song, they can then use it in another song. It's student operated and independent of teacher presence. So that if it's a tool, it can exist in all those scenarios. And it can be used when you're there, it can be used when you're not there, and it can be used on this song, but then also transferred to the next song. If the teacher is the tool, then the student doesn't have a tool. Okay, so then those start to become crutches. And as I said this before, I promise, these are not moral rebukes. I used to do all of this. If you've listened to, probably the first time I offended everyone with this philosophy was in my episode 18. I called it ripping off the Band-Aid because honestly, I was about ready to quit teaching. I was an assistant choir director at the school that I'm currently the head choir director, so this is a long time ago. And I was leading a 9th and 10th grade extracurricular after-school group that met once a week. And I don't play the piano well. I'm okay. Like I can hang, but like I am not open score proficient, and I'm definitely not able to like classroom manage while playing the piano and while, all those things that some amazing people who have keyboard backgrounds can do. I can't do all those things. And so I told this story in that first episode about this, and I was on a Monday night rehearsal, and we had a mom that would volunteer sometimes to show up and play the notes, and that helped a lot when she was there. But at one point in like October, she told me she can no longer come. She's got other commitments on that Monday night, and our staff accompanist was always with the upperclassmen because they got their notes played for them as well. So we have at my school an 11th and 12th grade extracurricular chamber choir and a 9th and 10th grade. At that time, as the assistant, I was directing the 9th and 10th grade group. So accompanist quits. She's a volunteer, so she can quit. And so I'm sitting there in that rehearsal, weeks go by. I am just about to tear my hair out. Like just absolutely tear my hair out. I'm sitting at the piano staring at these scores. Kids are scattered all around the room trying to learn their parts, and I'm playing everything for them. We use solfège in class like as a warm-up, basically. And they're just, at one point, I just slammed the piano down, the piano lid down. I was like, guys, because they're just being crazy. Classroom management was insane. I was like, guys, are you having fun? And they're like, no. And I was like, does it look like I'm having fun? No. Because I'm like pouring sweat. And I was like, guys, I don't know if I can do this anymore. This is just too hard for me, and it doesn't really feel like you guys are having fun. This is an extracurricular group. I mean, we don't have to be here. They were mature and they listened because they could tell that I was not only frustrated, but I was hurting because I felt stupid and I felt incompetent, and every choir I'd ever been in had functioned with a piano player sitting at the piano and playing, and they did fine. Why am I not doing fine? This must be a me problem, right? So they listened and they had a great conversation, and it came to me in that rehearsal. I think this was about mid-October of my 8th or 9th year teaching, maybe. And it basically came down to, okay, so I'm not a good enough piano player to do all this for you. I feel like when I'm working really hard to do it, you aren't working. You're waiting for me.
Like how many times we go through the song and I played it wrong, so now we have to go back. I played it wrong, so now we have to go back. That shouldn't be how it is. So you know that solfege stuff we do in class, like a warm-up every day? Yeah. What's that for? I don't know. So I said, well, we're going to start writing all those solfege syllables in, and I'm going to walk away from the piano, and you guys are going to have to just do that. I had no pedagogical training in that at all. Like I had never been exposed to a cappella only rehearsal, which by the way, and for those of you who don't listen to my show, that is what we do now. I don't touch the piano ever, not from the beginning of 9th grade. I go on my iPad now because it's 2026 and I played the tonic from the first day of class. It's the only thing I do. And they figure it out from there using solfege. So back to the story. So in that rehearsal, it was very, very slow, but they bought in because they didn't want me to quit. And they didn't want to quit deep down. I mean, ultimately, every kid wants to do well. And if they don't do well, they don't know how. That is something that my professor, Eve Ely, taught me back in the 90s. And I really, really believe that that's true. So they bought in and they helped. And it was really slow and it was really painful. And things went very, very slowly and very frustratingly. But at least I could get up away from the piano and come make eye contact with kids and engage with them and help them and see their confusion and see their effort and encourage them when they're not making an effort and all those things I could not do when I was stuck to the keyboard. Fast forward to the end of that school year, as I mentioned, there was an 11th and 12th grade chamber choir and a 9th and 10th. My 9th and 10th graders by the end of the school year were singing with more resonance and more well in tune than the 11th and 12th graders were after one school year. Then, of course, at that point, I hadn't done all the research and the hundreds of hours of research that I've now done on the neurological side of this and why this works. I just saw it work. I took over the program and we never touched the piano again. Now, 3 years later, it took 3 years. I walked in, so keep in mind, these are the 9th and 10th graders that experienced this with me for the first time. They're now juniors and seniors, okay, after 2 or 3 years of doing this. Who's familiar with Reinberger's Abendlied? 6-part polyphonic German, okay? So these kids are now juniors and seniors, and in our most advanced class during the school day is called our concert choir. It's SATB, it's about 100 kids, okay? I played an F on the piano at the beginning of class, and we rehearsed. This is the first day of school, by the way. First day of school. I played an F. We rehearsed Reinberger's Abendlied the entire hour, never left the key of F. We learned the entire motet in one class on the first day of school. That is the speed at which they operate when they're not waiting for me to be good at stuff. It's all coming from them being good at stuff. And that's why I say at the beginning, these are not quick, easy fixes. It took a while. It took a while to build the culture. Now, I don't know when the last time, in fact, it's been at least 10 years now since a kid has raised their hand and said, could you play that thing on the... They just don't ask anymore. So a piano reduction, for all the reasons I just described, can sometimes be a crutch. A teacher singing the answer to shorten the pain can be a crutch, and we all succumb to these things. Verbal corrections without student diagnosis can be a crutch. We're going to talk more about that later, so I'm going to go faster here. Rehearsal tracks in general, so I don't want to make it sound like I think rehearsal tracks are bad. I just think, like any tool, they're contextual. If they're being used to replace the need to learn to read it, then they won't ever learn to read it. Again, access is a different part of their brain. So we're going to think about whole language fluency next. I'm a big music as a language person. So I dove in as a dad into dyslexia research. She's also dyslexic, ADHD, those types of things. And I started to notice the ways that we teach kids who struggle to read outside of music in the language parts of our schools. I started to notice were the ways I had been now teaching choir, allowing kids time to decode, time to sound things out, working towards fluency, working at their own individual pace, working up to speed, all those types of things that we do in my choir class. And I was like, oh my God, I'm teaching dyslexic kids to read. That's what I've been doing. I didn't do it on purpose, but then I'm starting to see that these are the parallels. And so now I really do believe that music functions in our brain the way a language does. Now, if you think about that, that does make sense in this, like, well, there's no pitches. Well, there is in Mandarin Chinese, for example. That's a pitched language. You go up at the end of a sentence, it means something different if you go down. We even have elements of that in English, right? So if I start to talk to you like this and start to ask you questions, and I go up at the end, and you start to get a sense that I'm unsure, we are a pitched language also, maybe just not as pitched as Mandarin Chinese. It's Italian. Italian is a very pitched language. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Italians came up with bel canto. That is not a coincidence. It's how they talk. It is not a coincidence that spoken language became the bel canto singing tradition. So music functions the same way a language does if we teach them to see those things. Reading it, and this is where the research comes in, reading music lights up the same parts of our brain as reading English or reading Mandarin Chinese or reading Italian. The same parts of the brain are being used, plus more. Okay? Which is also why it's a valuable activity at school for kids to learn. We don't teach music by exposure, and we don't teach it by the discovery model. We teach it by explicit, cumulative decoding skills, the same way that they do in kindergarten with English. Now, Kodai, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with various Kodai philosophies, but one of the Kodai philosophies is that the voice is the original instrument, and that the foundation of all music education should be the voice. Right? And the reason for that is because only in a singer context does it all function the same way as spoken language does. Okay? So think about it this way. For those of you who are sitting close enough to see the screen, if you see the word WHOLE, okay, what word does that go? Yes. You don't have to think about the different phonemes in that word anymore, because you have already learned to decode and fluently reproduce the sound that those symbols represent. Music notation does the same thing. It does the same thing. It just has more specific requirements of pitch and duration. But again, every language has requirements of pitch and duration, just to varying degrees of specificity. So I believe that Kodai would be on my team if he were alive today, because he would have seen all the same brain imaging scans that I've seen. Training the ear to hear, understand, and identify, and the eye to decode and synthesize has to come first in order for this to work. Okay. So, shameless plug, you need to buy this poster and put it in your classroom. It's available on my website. But even if you don't, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about it here. So this is has anybody seen the reading rope, Scarborough's reading rope before? Is this a new concept for anyone? Okay, great. I'm excited that it's a new concept. This is not my concept. So I've got the credit here. You just probably can't read it. But this is Scarborough's reading rope, and Scarborough is a science of reading expert, but not thinking about the music context. He was thinking about teaching kindergartners to read English and all of that. And he came up with this concept that is now very, very well supported by the science of reading literature and research, that in order for a student to read something fluently, there's actually 8 different things that they are doing all at the same time that allow them eventually to read fluently. And so the image here lists the 8 things and then uses the analogy of a rope being slowly twisted together with each string until it's wound tight enough that it no longer needs to be thinking about all 8 of those things all at once. But with the beginning reader, this is why you can picture your kindergartners, if you're a parent or something, or at home and they're learning to read, and they're pointing at the letter usually, and they're trying to think and sound something out or use context clues, and they're going really slow, and it's very painful for them. Because what they're doing is they're over here weaving completely disparate strands of the rope together. Okay? And over time, it all starts to happen automatically, like you guys just did with the word whole. Just came out. Okay? So what I'm trying to do in a music context is I'm trying to figure out how to teach singers to read as fluently as you read English. And most of my kids do by 12th grade. Okay? So we figured it out. And here's what we do. So this chart now is my creation, because I have now taken Scarborough's work and I have redone it for music, taking our terminology and our concepts. So in order to read well, a student has to have a thorough audio library in their brain. They have to have a thorough audio library. So in our case, that would be things like, what does do to re sound like? That is one tiny little audio file that they have to have, or else they can't sing that first scale degree. What does a triplet sound like? Well, in my case, I'm a takadimi guy, so that means that they have memorized takira, takira, takira. They can memorize that. They're not memorizing what triplets sound like in a song. They're memorizing what triplets sound like. Other audio library things would be, like what does a major chord sound like? Can I tell it's a major chord? I can hear a major chord happening in my head. So how thorough our audio library is determines what they can read. If they've never been exposed to those sounds, they can't read them. Vocabulary would just be the things that, what do we call them? Well, we call a ta, we call it a quarter note, whatever. Like those are the basic music vocabulary things and what they look like and what they're called. They have to know all these things in order to be able to read it. Form and pattern is something, and again, these are all parallels in spoken language too. A form and pattern would be, oh, I've seen this part before. That would be like, oh, this is verse 2. And how quickly can they recognize this is verse 2? I can now access the memory part of my brain. I don't have to use all of the cognitive load that it takes to read something for the first time anymore. I can recognize that that is verse 2, and now I can think about other things. Muscle coordination is the hardest for the changing voice boys. Muscle coordination is the how do I take that sound that I can hear in my head and make it happen with my body. For singers, this is way harder than it is for speaking English because we have more specifications of pitch and duration. So this is where, for muscle coordination, we'll get to this later as one of the tools, a lot of vocal affect. This is where the rote teaching is very helpful. We're getting them to learn how to coordinate their muscles of what does it feel like to sing an F at the top of the treble clef if I'm a female soprano. What does it feel like? How much energy does that take? What does my body have to do? I might know where that note is, but then I try to sing it and it comes out as a C, which happens a lot when kids are reading because let's say I'm in the key of F, right? And they see a high do on the staff and a C comes out. Why? They weren't using enough energy, and a C belongs to a 1 chord that an F is in. And so it sounds fine to them, but the issue is not that they don't know what an F sounds like. The issue is that they didn't know how it felt to get up there. And so in class, when those mistakes happen, I actually don't ever say to them, that's the wrong note. I say, can you sing that with more energy and see if you can get all the way up to the top of the staff? They fix it. So it's muscle coordination. Then music theory, I don't need to define music theory for you. Phonological awareness refers to, do I know what I just heard? So phonological awareness refers to again, music context. I'll do lots of exercises like, let's do one. So here's a pitch. This pitch is do. Are you solfège people? Great. That's the correct answer. So this pitch is do. Good? What is this? It's phonological awareness. And of course, you can get way more complicated than that, right? So I start the very first day of school. I'm already doing exercises like this. I'll have them close their eyes. And I'll do either on the piano or with my voice. I'll say, if this is do, what's this? What's this? And I have them close their eyes so that I can see who is understanding and who's not understanding, and they just show it to me on their hands. Okay? Are you hearing what I'm playing, and can you tell me what you're hearing? And that way also, I can tell who isn't understanding and help them. Give them more attention. Decoding is just like in English, and that is the sounding out process. That is like, I'm looking at this music, it is too complicated for me to just sing it. I need to decode it first. I need to figure out what these solfège syllables are. I need to figure out where my toddies and my takadimis and all those things are. I need to do a little decoding first. Sight recognition is not quite what you think, which is sight recognition is not just can I sight read it. Sight recognition is just the idea that when I look at the music, I can tell it's do. I can tell it's me, right? So a very frequent thing that happens, because we do tests, we'll talk about this later, but I test every single student individually. They all sight read by themselves, about 3 times a year in person, and then we also use Sight Reading Factory for at-home assignments. So when they're doing this for the first time, I hear a lot of stuff like this. Okay, I'm going to channel a 9th grade boy. Do, re, do, mi, fa, do. The syllables were correct. The pitches weren't. I see that a lot, which means that they are recognizing by sight the vocabulary. They're recognizing a lot of the things over there on the left. They don't have the audio library or the muscle coordination yet. So in my system, well, I'll just do another hot take. In most choir classrooms, that's just wrong. That was not correct. In my classroom, you're doing like 5 of those things correctly. We just need to work on these 2. Yeah, I've got those 2. I gotta get better with my my muscle coordination, or I just need to work on my audio library. 5 of those things were correct. There was the right rhythm, you were singing chord notes, you were telling me that it was do when it was do, it was re when it was re. Now you got to know when your voice is going up, what that feels like. So it gives them a thing to work on rather than this unsurmountable task that feels so incredibly hard. So a little bit of these things, I'll speed through them if I've already covered them. We have something to learn, I think, from other reading instruction disciplines. I think we should be, as all music educators, band, choir, and orchestra, in my opinion, should be thinking about all of these things. But I think we should also borrow their terminology. Phonics, for example. Who's heard of phonics? It is the building blocks of the language, of the sounds that make up the language. Musicians have building blocks of language too. They are our solfège syllables, they are our takadimi syllables, or whatever system you use, count singing, any of those systems can create a phonological or a phonics library. Decoding is the part of the sight reading process. One of the big things that I discovered a long time ago too is that the success of what we do in our program comes a lot from the individual work, and also from abandoning what I would call kind of the traditional philosophy of, if we do grade a kid individually on sight reading at all, which in most places don't, but if we do at all, it's right or wrong. So I don't grade on right or wrong. I grade on, can you by yourself use your tools to solve this musical problem? If they make the mistake and they solve it, their grade is still an A. Okay? They lose points only if I have to step in and remind them how to solve the problem. So examples. I'll be a 9th grade girl this time. My dreams are coming true. So I'm trying to think of a good example. So this would be like, imagine that the line of music is a do, re, mi, quarter, eighth, quarter, dotted eighth, and then 8th note re back to do. Can you picture it? Okay. Do, A. In the first instance, she sang it wrong, or whatever, right? But in my grading system, she doesn't lose any points. Scenario 2, and then she happily just continues on throughout the exercise. Hold on. Check your rhythm in the first measure. Was that correct? No. And then she'll go back and fix it. In my grading system, I only take away one tiny little point because I had to go tell her. Her grade is still a 49 out of 50. Okay? Then I start having to take a little bit more points away if I have to then demonstrate how to do that dotted quarter note, because by that point, these are final exams where they've been taught how to do all these things. But if I simply have to tell her that there was a mistake, go find it, and she can solve it on her own, what grade is a 49 out of 50? That's an A. She is reading well. She is becoming fluent. She is not yet fluent, but she is on her way to becoming fluent. She's in that decoding phase that our kindergarten reading teachers would recognize from a kid who can tell they made a mistake and just goes back and fixes it. That's what I want our students to think about when they're reading music. They stumbled over something. So let me read something off my screen here. I'm just going to read my subtitle there as an example. Also a staged demonstration here. From other reading instruction disciplines, did you hear my stutter? No one would hear a person read that way and go, he can't read. They would all immediately recognize that that person can read and just made a mistake. We should be grading our kids that way too. Okay? Now, of course, I recognize that like if it's an all-state festival that does they're grading 100 kids or 200 kids in a day and they have to make it like all or nothing, I get that. But in the context of my classroom, I'm not trying to teach all-staters. I'm trying to teach every kid to learn how to be able to do these things. And I want them to treat their music reading the same way that their kindergarten teacher with kind, loving nurturingness taught their English reading. So they're eventually going to work towards fluency, which means that they take a look at that piece of music that they're reading at their appropriate level, which I have determined through individual work with them, and they're able to sing it without stopping and making mistakes. Then I know they're fluent at that level. These are sight reading factory levels for me, by the way, and then they move on. So when they're fluent at a level 2, I tell them it's time to move on to level 3. I usually say, good news and bad news. And like, what? You are now so good at level 2s, they are going to be boring for you. It's time to do harder ones. And they're like, oh, okay. And they move on. Comprehension is what comes after fluency. So after fluency, we get comprehension, which means not only can I read the line of music with virtually no mistakes, I understand how it's built. I understand why it was structured that way. I understand the role of my line in context of other lines. because my cognitive load of reading this music is now so low that I'm singing my part while listening to the tenors and having a musical conversation with them at sight. So now we're going to get into the toolbox, the actual toolbox. So this is where the presentation goes a little bit from the science and the philosophy into some of the how I do this. How do we do this every day? Since this is kind of a halfway point, do I have any questions so far? You guys are sitting so far away, it's making me freak out. Yes. That chart is up on my wall. On my website, there are varying sizes of it depending on your room. I have the biggest size, and I would say my poster is about like that, but it's on the website in smaller sizes too. So I use that. I actually have an 8.5 by 11 size version of that poster sitting on my desk, because when the kids do their individual work with me, they come into my office one at a time. It takes about 4 or 5 minutes. It's really just a tune-up. It's a checkup. That's how I explain it to them. They're usually scared at first. They're terrified, in fact. But one of my favorite things about that individual work is I would say it is probably the biggest single source of culture and trust building in my classroom, because I get so many kids. Let me ask you, do any of you have shy kids in choir that don't sing out? Weird. I'm just kidding. I do too. And it is the individual work that solves that in my context. Because what tends to happen in choirs, I have these theories about choir psychology. When we get kids in elementary school who are just already by personality, they're brave and they sing out, what do we usually tell them about themselves in choir? What do they start to learn about themselves? They are a leader. They are one of the best ones. And they are going to be a star someday in high school. And all these things. And we pump those kids up, but I think we forget sometimes what happens to the inner psyche of the kid who is not getting that feedback. That tiny little mousy voice kid might be the best musician in your classroom, and you will never know it. Okay? So the individual work is where I discover that about kids, because they are now not in this big classroom full of a bunch of kids. They're just with me, and maybe they're super shy and they're super mousy, but I'm able to find like 7 or 8 things on that chart that they can do really, really well, and pump them up and tell them things like, we need your voice. You are reading really, really well. You're singing the right notes, but I can't hear you in class. Can you sing louder? And then they start to, that's a private conversation, rather than in front of 40 kids and like, hey, sing louder, right? So these are really good things. So now, yikes. Back to your question, when I use that terminology, I use it in those individual checkups. I have that chart sitting there on my desk, and as they're doing their very first, I call it a pre-test in October of beginning year, they come in and they read something like a Sight Reading Factory level 1 or 2, and I introduce them to those concepts. I've introduced them to the concepts in class first, and then I come in and give them kind of an assessment based on how they're doing in each of those areas. So for example, I'm in a suburb just south of Kansas City, Missouri, and I get a lot of kids whose families have tried to move out of the city to get their kids a better education. For example, African American students who have grown up in one of the still very proud Black church traditions in the city, which we don't really have in the suburbs, and they've never read music before. But oh my goodness, is their audio library incredible. And in that scenario, they're looking at a piece of music, they've never seen this before, or had to think about the vocabulary words of a quarter note and a half note or whatever, but I'm able to recognize that even though you had no idea what this music sounds like based on looking at it, I gave you a G once, and you have not even drifted away from the key of G ever. Even though you're making mistakes all over the place, I can point to that kid and go, your audio library is incredible. Once you let me teach you these things, you're going to be a star. It changes the conversation dramatically to be able to point at those things that are their strengths and the things that they need to work on. So that's kind of how I use it. So getting into the toolbox now, teaching tools, not songs. That's my goal. That's my ethos. In order to pull it off, it does have to happen every day. Once they taste the sweet, sweet nectar of doing it the easy way, it is very, very difficult to get them to buy in to doing it any other way, because it starts slow and it starts painful and it starts with them having to work a lot harder than you. And teenagers typically don't like that until they become good at it, at which point then, like in that picture of the girls pushing me away from the circle, then they love it. They love it. They love the fact that they did this. This is not Mr. Muntz's project. This is something we did. especially for the shy kids, because I really do believe that when a choir hears a recording of themselves after a performance, and they know deep down that they didn't really do any of the mental effort that it took to make that performance, they're not as proud of it. But if they hear that as, well, that's something I did. I remember how hard that rhythm was, and I figured it out. Those things are very powerful tools for our retention. Also, by the way, okay, so the speed that I was talking about that we eventually get to comes from them having to do these things on their own without help on the piano. The reason it speeds things up, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of neurological reasons why it speeds things up to not play things on the piano. However, the biggest one is that they don't need anybody's help. They don't have to wait on you. They don't have to wait on the accompanist. They don't have to wait on anybody to be there to present the information for them. The problem that we face is that they are waiting for answers, and we then deal with our classroom management. So the first tool that I recommend is to take away the piano. Now, the piano is a uniquely problematic instrument for guiding a choir, yet it is the one we all use. Here's why it's uniquely problematic. I'm a nerd, by the way, so this is going to be a sound waves-based take on why the piano is a uniquely bad instrument to guide a choir with. Anybody know what a sound wave of a piano striking a keyboard or a keyboard strikes looks like on a spectrograph? Anybody ever seen it? Okay, so a piano, when you strike a note on the piano, the frequency shows up at its loudest volume right away. Like within the first fraction of a millisecond, the entire overtone spectrum of that pitch that's audible to the human ear is already in the room, which means that you have answered the question before they've even answered it. In a shorter amount of time than it takes for the vocal folds to actually come together and start vibrating, they've already got the answer. So when we are reading along with the piano, they actually aren't reading. At a neurological level, they aren't reading, they're already remembering. And there's great ways to demonstrate this with your own group. I like to do this at the beginning of the year when I'm trying to get beginners to buy into this system, is I have them close their eyes, and I simply play a melody on the piano and tell them to hum along. And I'm like, do you see how easy that was? They're like, yeah. Okay, why? Well, because we're able to get, and they're right with me, by the way. So they close their eyes, and I play this intricate melody, and they're humming, and they're able to get to what I played within fractions of a second, right? It sounds almost as if they're reading music, because their eyes are closed and they're just singing what they hear. Because the piano answers the question in such a quick amount of time that then their vocal folds fully come together to vibrate a pitch after that. And that is something you can prove too by looking at a spectrograph. The voice functions more closely to like a violin, for example. A violin would be a much better instrument to lead your choir with, because then it would mimic the human voice a little bit more, and they would have to sing into the sound rather than respond to the sound. So of course I'm not advocating that you get out your violin and play along, but my point is that the reason I think some of us maybe don't think about it in these terms, because the piano functions as well as it does in the context we use it, because it provides that answer before they've even asked. So the hard truth, and I think this is true of all learners in all subjects, by the way, but if they can't start their answer, so to speak, from something within inside their own mind, then they don't know the answer. So the way I describe this to my kids would be like if you went to your math class and you told the teacher that you promise you can solve that equation as long as you can do it with your neighbor. How would that go for you? They wouldn't believe you. Like there would be no demonstration that you actually know what it is that you're doing. So that's important. So all the tools depend on this one thing. So like if we don't do this part, then it doesn't really work. True self-sufficiency is possible, but the piano will hold them back. We think it's speeding them up, but it'll hold them back. So instead of the piano, we use solfège. That's the tool.
So we're going to stop this week right there. What you're going to hear next week is my introduction of all of the tools and how they are used in my classroom. This first part is kind of the setup of why this is important and what has to be kind of true and normalized within your environment to make all of this work. And then next week, we're going to get into the tools themselves. I will also be adding some portions that were not present in the presentation because I ran out of time. So you're going to get the full second half of the presentation next week in part 2. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me
continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.